In December of 2023, 74-year-old Monique Olivier was found guilty on charges of 3 more murders that her and her husband had committed back during their reign of terror back in France. Now, Monique Olivier was also the widow of the French serial killer Michel Fourniret, who was known as the Ogre of Ardennes. Now, the 3 victims that her and her late husband are convicted of unaliving was 20-year-old Joanne Parrish, who disappeared back in 1990, along with Marie-Angélie Domis, who, in which I hope pronounce her name correctly, who disappeared back in 1988, as well as Estella Mouzin, who was 9 years old at the time, who disappeared back in 2002. Now, both Joanne and Marie's bodies were both found, but Estella's still has not been found to this day. Now, Monique was going to say that she felt like a dog relationship because her job in this whole entire thing was to lure young women and to confirm if there was a virgin or not before her husband go ahead and do what he did best with them. Monique would go on to say that she stood by and did nothing while her husband would go ahead and assault these women and then strangle them afterwards when he was done. And she said that she felt like a coward because she did nothing at all. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and go into the story about how these two met and what they did throughout the time period of their reign of terror. So the way that these two had met was that Monique had met Michel through a pen pal advertisement in a Roman Catholic magazine. And at the time period, Michel was actually doing time in prison for SAing a young girl back in 1966. Now, Monique was a former nurse and Michel was a former supervisor of a school as well as a trade. Now, throughout the letters they would pass back and forth to each other, Michel was going to tell Monique about the times that his mother would do adult inappropriate things to him as he was growing up, and the pair ended up bonding because she felt that he was able to open up to her. But shortly after Michel's release from prison, him and Monique actually got married to one another, and that's when his reign of terror would start. Now, Michel and Monique would have this dominant sub relationship where Michel was most of the dominant person and Monique was a sub person who just did whatever he told her to do. So the way they would find their victims is that they would just drive along a city street until they found somebody that was walking by themselves, mostly women, and they would pretend like they was new to the area, they don't know how to get around, and so they would ask for directions. And so back then, everybody was friendly and trustworthy, and so the girls would get into the cars with them and go about their merry way and try to show them direct where they need to go. But unbeknownst to them, Michel would drive into an undisclosed location where he would grab them, and then Monique would follow up with injecting them with Rohypnol. Now, they would then drive back to an undisclosed location or to hit their house, and that's where Michel would assay them as well as unalive them after he was finished with them. Now, one of his victims was Farida Hamici, who was actually one of his old cellmate's wife when he was locked up in prison. And so she asked him for his help in digging up some gold coins and gold ingots that they had buried after her husband had went to jail for bank robbery. And so he agreed to help. And in the process of it, they dug up the treasure and everything, and she gave him a cut of it by giving him over 500,000 francs, which is the equivalent of over $586, 395. Now, as part of it, she gave him a cut of the profit by giving him over 500,000 francs, which is equivalent to $586,395,000 in US dollars. Now, Michel, he was happy with that cut, but the thing was, he was greedy and he wanted the whole entire pot. So he did come up with a ruse where he convinced her to come outside, hang out with him. But in the process, he went ahead and attacked her and unalived her as well. And afterwards, he broke into her house and stole the rest of the loot, in which what they ended up doing was they actually bought a chateau with all the proceeds that they made. So jumping forward, the couple had met a woman that was known as 21-year-old Jeanne Derchemont, and where they had met her on a train, and so they befriended her. And so they asked her like, hey, why don't you come back to our place? And after we was like finished hanging out, we can drop you off where you need to be dropped off of. And so she agreed to it, and so she went back to the place. And in the process of doing that, Michel had asked her, was she a virgin? And where she replied with, no, I have a boyfriend. And that enraged Michel to a point where he physically attacked her. And it got to a point where the woman fell for her life. So she actually fought back with everything she had, but she didn't make it afterwards. What Michel would end up doing is that he would gag her with adhesive bandages and then go ahead and proceed into strangling her and then bury her body in an undisclosed location. Now, the couple would be arrested after the failed attempt of kidnapping a 13-year-old girl, and while they was being interrogated by the police, the couple would not give way of any kind of interrogation techniques that they would use, and so the police felt like they had nothing, so they let them go. But a year later, Monique had a change of heart and she confessed to everything that her and her husband had did. She would then tell police that her and her husband had alive a number of people since 1988 and would continue on doing all of it until 2002. Now, once Michel had caught wind that Monique had confessed to everything, he had went ahead and confessed and said that he unalived more than 8 women and 1 male, but they was not even confirmed if the male was actually true or not. But he would later on confess that he unalived a total of 11 people, in which they all range from the ages of 12 to 30 years old. Alright, so now the bodies of some of their victims were found between the borders of both France and Belgium. So the couple would actually go back and forth between each countries and commit their crimes. And so in the process of doing all that, the couple had told the whereabouts of most of the bodies, but some of them they could not locate. And so out of 4 victims they told them about, only 3 of them were able to be found. So Michel was actually found guilty for the 7 murders of the bodies that they were able to find, and he was serving life in prison without the possibility of parole. But he shortly passed away in 2021 at the age of 79. Now, Monique Olivier is currently serving a life without the possibility of parole after 28 years, which is equivalent of only have to do 28 years before she's eligible for parole. And since the passing of her husband, she is having to face all these charges on her own. So if these are some of the videos that you like, go ahead and check out the rest of my videos and hope you find some that you enjoy.